The best that we can make sense of it, the best that we can conjure up what climate change is before our eyes, is actually through metaphor. So for most people, the most vivid connection that they will have with climate change is the metaphorical depictions of what it is, as it was with Brexit.
Now then, what are politicians saying to you? I don't mean what are they saying, but what are they saying? What images are they using? What are they making you think about around the edges of the boring words they're using? What's the metaphor they're conjuring up? Are they making your mouth water subconsciously like a Pavlovian dog because they're weaving breakfast and cake into the background of every story they're telling you about something they want you to like? Are they making you cross and uncomfortable and feeling like things are crawling on you when they're talking about things you're not supposed to like? I bet you that they are. At least they are if they know what they're doing. This is metaphor. We love stories. We love connections. Our brains get chemical boosts from different sort of metaphors. It's incredibly important in communication. It's incredibly important for thinking about our own brains and what we think about climate change. What metaphors do we use without realising it? And what do those stories already prefigure about what we think we can and can't do about climate change? Well, joining me this month on Your Brain on Climate is Simon Lancaster. Simon is an all-round good egg. He's written a book called Connect, which is all about metaphor and connection and how your brain links an idea to another idea, how powerful that is at the level of brain chemistry, and how it works in speeches and rhetoric and in getting people to think stuff. Simon used to be a speechwriter for some of the most powerful politicians in the country and now plies his trade helping anyone think about how to write good speeches and use metaphor well. And to top things off, he is, like me, a supporter of by far the greatest team the world has ever seen, Brentford Football Club. So we got on. As always, this noise denotes wisdom. It means that someone, usually Simon, let's face it, has said something interesting, and you might want to refer to it later. Go and check out the show notes, and I'll have a link for more information whenever you hear the lovely owls. Thank you so much to people who've started to sponsor me on Patreon. It makes a huge difference to me. I pay my guests, I paid Simon, I pay everyone who comes on here, because I think it's important. I think people should be paid for their time and their expertise and for wrapping their brains around what all of this means for climate change. So if you want to join them, you can go to www.patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. Right, on with it. And the first thing we talked about, sorry about this, is football. Indeed, Brentford doesn't last very long, and there's a point to it. It's all about connection and that tingly feeling you get in a big crowd of people when things are going well.
Your brain on climate.
I think it's that amazing feeling of people together in the same space, sharing the same perspective. We're all looking the same way, sharing the same colours. We're all wearing the same shirts, singing the same songs at once, wanting the same things. There's something absolutely beautiful about it. And I mean, you get it at football matches. You get it at pop concerts as well. Yeah. You know, when everyone's singing along.
Church.
You get it in church. And I mean, it's very similar. The way that you can bring people together and with a few little symbols, a few little cues, triggers, to use the word that everyone likes at the moment. And I think there's something really funny about how when we're coming out of trauma, actually, and you're bringing people together around music. So one of the other stories that I tell in the book is about 9/11, actually. And just after when 9/11 happened, I was at the Grand Hotel in Brighton. It was TUC conference, right. And I was down there with Alan Johnson. and a few others. And Tony Blair had been given his speech, due to give his speech that day, and then the news came through from New York. And he had to rip up the speech he was going to give, and instead he went and he said he's got to return to London, and we're shoulder to shoulder with the United States and all of that. And the rest of TUC then carried on, but with everyone in a bit of a state of shock, really. And I remember that night that we all stood around the piano in the bar at the Grand Hotel. I'm a pianist as well, and everyone was singing "Hey Jude," as we do at Brentford. And it was a phenomenal night. And then weirdly, just more recently, when the night that the Queen passed, bizarrely, I was with Alan Johnson that night again, and he was launching his new book. One of our ministers is missing, and the news came through that the Queen had died. And it was like, what is it that whenever we get together, there's a tragedy like this? Is it thinking our meetings are cursed? But bizarrely, and without thinking about it, we ended that night as well. A few of us, Alan didn't come along, but there was a gang of us. We went to the piano bar just by Embankment Station. Have you ever been there?
I know where it is. I know where it is. I haven't been there.
And it was the same thing. Everyone's around the piano, and whether you're singing along to Bohemian Rhapsody or Mamma Mia, there's something beautiful about that feeling of lots of people dealing with stuff, whether it's a specific event like a tragedy or just dealing with the weirdness that is being a human being, but finding some kind of communal spirit. I'm sounding very kumbaya.
No, but it's, your whole book is
scout leader.
Your whole book is about the importance of connection. We couldn't call this episode Connection because I recently did one about connection, so we're going to call it something else. But that sort of runs all the way through, right? Connecting with people. That's what communication is. You're a speechwriter. You're an amazing communicator, a brilliant writer. And I was wondering, whether or not you are thinking about the words you're going to use at all times. Like when you're talking to me now, are you thinking I have to get Dave to like me so he doesn't ask me horrible questions, and thinking about the words you're going to use? Or are you just naturally good at this stuff?
I'm not thinking about it too much. The way I think about it, I think if I think at all about what I'm saying, I'm very visual. And so, for instance, when I'm describing things, I am seeing what I'm describing. And someone recently got in touch with me and said they don't do this. And they told me the medical term for it. It is a medical term that they don't visualize stuff when they're describing it. They can't properly, they don't have memories. But no, I hope you like me. You got me worried now. Do you like me, Dave? I just ask you.
It's far too early to say. The jury is firmly out. No, you seem very nice. So look, tell me a bit more. Your brain on climate. Tell me a bit more about the brain bit of this. So, when our brains form connections between different things, when we hear a word and we go, "Ooh, that word is making me feel good," what's going on at the level of the brain, chemistry-wise? What do you know about that?
Well, it's through connections, basically. The way our mind works, it's lots of words connected to other words. And you can think of this, some people think about it using the metaphor of a web of words, so that if you say one word, it then leads to other words in the fun word association games that we all play. But also with thoughts, we think through connections. So if I say a word now, like cockroaches,
dirty.
Yeah. Straight away, dirty, diseased, nasty, disgusting, all of this kind of stuff. And just straight away, you've activated a whole load of thoughts. Whereas if I say to you, sunshine, then you'll be thinking warm, glow, holidays, all of this kind of stuff. If I say to you, war, you'll go down another field. And so this is the way our mind works, through these instant connections. And it's not just through words. It's like if you see someone, you meet someone for the first time, and you just see their face, and straight away you connect their face with other faces that you've seen in the past. And you might be like, oh, you look just like my brother. And my brother's a great guy, and he's my best friend as well. And so I will then make an assumption that we're going to be best friends. Whereas if you look like someone who bullied me at school, I might be wary of you and lead you. So it can lead you. It will lead you down paths, but it can lead you down the wrong path as well. But this is basically how our brain works, through these kind of neural pathways, connections.
So you hear a word. Let's keep with the cockroach thing. I like that. I'm afraid I didn't have the presence of mind to say QPR when you asked me to associate that word, but never mind. You hear a word, and immediately is your brain literally like making so you have like, or maybe, do you know this? You have like two ideas in your head. You have cockroach and you have dirty. And is something literally like a bit of electricity going between those things? Is that kind of what's happening at the brain level? Yeah.
That's what's going on. You've got electricity. So the more your brain is thinking, the more your brain is actually generating electricity. And this is measurable. You can see how alive our brains are. But this is fundamentally what's going on there. So you have one thought there and one thought there, and you're making a connection between these two ideas. And if that connection keeps being made, so if every time you go to Brentford, people are talking about QPR as cockroaches, the more you hear that, the more firm that connection is going to get, the more established that connection is going to get. So what neuroscientists say is when neurons fire together, they wire together. And so that becomes a stronger and stronger connection. So after a while, someone just needs to say the words to you, QPR, and straight away you're like, disgusting, disease, all of those words that we were connecting with cockroaches, because that connection is now firmly made in our minds. So on the idea of like cockroaches, this can lead you into very, very negative spaces. Of course, what we saw in Rwanda, in the genocides there back in, was it 93, 94, when the Tutsi, the economically dominant ethnic minority group, the Tutsi, were depicted as cockroaches by the Hutu, who were the economically minor ethnic majority out there. So they were called cockroaches. And you had this series of infamous radio broadcasts that called them cockroaches. And if you're thinking about someone as less than human, then you're not going to see them as humans. You're going to see them as less than human, which then means it makes killing actually not just legitimate, but a good thing to do. You're justifying extermination because, of course, cockroaches are disgusting and you'll get infested. And so that's where this language can become very, very pernicious. And of course, this is what Hitler did with the Jews. You know, Hitler believed he was doing a good thing. Everyone believes they're doing a good thing. It's like the Mitchell and Webb sketch, you know.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't.
Hans, are we the baddies?
But if everyone does this kind of thing, and we rationalize our behavior through all sorts of irrational means, often through making these fictitious and sometimes harmful connections. So we see this, you know, for years now. We've had a debate about migrants, you know, as Suella Braverman describes it, as an invasion, you know, so but these people have been depicted. David Blunkett, the Labour Home Secretary, talked about a swamp, you know, so we're being swamped. So that's obviously pernicious, dehumanizing. But also David Cameron talked about a swarm of refugees at Calais. So this puts you in mind of locusts and infestation. So this is where language can lead you down a very dangerous path if you're not careful.
It's doing a couple of things, right? It's making you think of a particular emotional response or a particular association. So take the migrant example, you know, invasion, you know, you don't want to be invaded, so you feel defensive about that. But it also implies a solution, doesn't it? Because we know when we're being invaded, we know what we do, which is we get our guns and we fight back, right? When we are falling into a swamp, we know what we do, which is that we, call for help and someone pulls us out. We have these kind of solutions, right? So this is really powerful stuff.
It's really powerful. But, you know, the way that we speak affects the way that we think, that affects the way that we feel, that then affects how we act. And so it goes round and round in this kind of circular movement. So this is where you can achieve change. You just change one word like that. You know, you can speak about people as stars. that leads us to think, these are good, they're positive, they're higher beings, if you talk about them as stars, or you can speak about them as scum. And then you're seeing people that are beneath the earth. And these just one word
Wow.
can lead people to completely different emotions. And of course, you see scum in the context, of course, of trade unions, pickets, football games, all of this kind of language. Also on the front page of newspapers. And it does, as you say, it demands a response. You need to wipe this out. For most of us, scum, in a real and practical sense, is something we get in our bloody baths. And you need to go down there and you need to wipe it out. You need to scrub it off. And so you have a solution that is readily made there. And then, of course, when you get some of this language and you talk about social cleansing, then you see that's the solution. That does, but you are dehumanizing people there.
You get this in climate change all the time, don't you? Because it is this big kind of thing that isn't like an abstract kind of thing that we all struggle to kind of get our heads around. The words that we use to describe it do, I've noticed this, make you think of a particular solution. There is a war. The war on climate change. We are at war with climate change, for example, right? If you say that, what you're doing in your brain, you're going, well, there is an enemy, there is a thing that is happening to me, and we are going to pull together and kind of fight it. Or you could use all sorts of other language, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there has been research on this very point, where just changing one word can make an enormous difference. An American researcher called Stephen Flusberg did a study in 2017 or 2018, it was, where he compared war and race metaphors. And so you can talk about a war against climate change, or you can talk about we're in a race against climate change. Just change one word, but there are other associated words, connected words that you can use within those bigger headings, of course. So if you're in war, you can talk about we've got to defend ourselves, we've got to protect ourselves, we're in a fight against climate change, we've got to combat climate change. There's all sorts of similar words. And likewise in race, we're lagging, we're catching up, or we're falling behind, we need to accelerate our efforts, all of those associated words. But what he found was that using the war metaphor made people much more likely to agree that climate change was a major challenge for us, and also to report that they would take more efforts to stop climate change using the war metaphor. Now, this has huge implications. It's not just metaphor is a stylistic thing where it's just someone in the comms team or a PR advisor lazily putting together some cliche, some hackneyed line for a press notice. It's like, no, you must think strategically about which word is going to, if you want to achieve change, if your object is to achieve change, and the United Nations have a challenge at the moment, 8 billion people on the planet need to change their behavior. It's not just about heads of government. 8 billion people need to change their behavior. So the way they talk about it is really rather important. And yet the United Nations, their whole campaign has been billed as the race to zero. So they're not using the most powerful frame that they could be. And in actual fact, like if you look at Antonio Guterres, who's a pretty good speaker, he's good on as far as multilateral organizations go. His metaphors are all over the place when you read his speeches, and he's talking about roadmaps and being on the back burner and on the life support machine, and he's not creating clear imagery.
And this roadmap must deliver effective institutional arrangements for financing. Getting concrete results on loss and damage is a litmus test of the commitment of the governments to the success of COP27.
The best communicators through history and right up to the present day, they have clear, simple narratives running through in the way they speak. Greta Thunberg has this, our house is on fire. That is next level. She's taken something which is abstract and distant, and she's making it local, personal, and immediate to all of us. And we all understand, I'm in my house at the moment, you're in your house. If your house is on fire, you don't sit around and wait for someone else to do something. You've got to do something right now. You can't wait a minute. You've got to do it right now. So by doing that, by using that our house is on fire language, I think she made a massive difference to the debate on climate change single-handedly by changing the metaphor. She changed perception, which changed the way we speak, think, feel, and act. So now we see far more people talk about climate change as an emergency now than they did pre-Greta.
So interesting.
PG should call it PG, like BC.
PG. Yes, AG. I'm reflecting on your point about it's not just about making something look nice, but the metaphors that you use can have a real impact on how people think about it. And all through your book, you've got examples of this. And you talk about in Brexit, how there were all these lovely food metaphors that were used by Boris Johnson and others, like cake and breakfast and all. Indeed, the very words sounded like breakfast. And a lot of people might think that stuff doesn't matter, but you're saying, no, really, you may not even be noticing it's happening on you, but it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just that it matters. It's absolutely fundamental to our perception of things, particularly things that we cannot see. Climate change, yes, of course, we have evidence on a day-by-day basis. We can see it's raining, but then we've all grown up with rain. So it's not that. We're still not really seeing climate change. So the best that we can make sense of it, the best that we can conjure up what climate change is before our eyes, is actually through metaphor. So for most people, the most vivid connection that they will have with climate change is the metaphorical depictions of what it is, as it was with Brexit. So Brexit, fundamentally, you're talking about the European Union. No one could see the European Union. You can't see, you can picture a map and stuff like that, but what does a treaty look like? A treaty doesn't look like anything. And so different people on different sides of the debate had very different perspectives on what the European Union was. If you were pro-Europe, then your metaphor, your X equals Y, the thing that you were substituting for the European Union was that the European Union was a family. And so we would, and this was a metaphor that really started with the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. Before that, it was a community, the European community, and we'd speak about our friends and neighbours in Europe. Then after that, it was the family of European nations, and that was the way we spoke about it. So Brexit then was a divorce. If you were a Remainer, you saw Brexit as a divorce. And this wasn't just used once or twice. This was, if you Google Brexit divorce, you're going to get tens of millions of results. It regularly featured on front page headlines, and then it imprints in our memories, our subconscious. It shapes the way that we feel about it. Now, most people are not going to see divorce as a positive thing. There are exceptions. Every now and then I say this, and some people say, "Oh my God, my divorce was the best thing I ever did." It brought me absolute freedom. And I've been in prison before. And in fact, you see, that's the way that Brexiteers saw the European Union. They didn't see it as a family; they saw it as prison. Right. Now, in the interests of research, I emphasize this. I went to a Brexit Party rally. There was a Brexit Party rally down in Newport, not far from where I live. I live in the Brecon Beacons. And I'd been told for years, Nigel Farage and Richard Tice are incredible speakers. They've got incredible power. And of course they did. I'd seen them on Question Time and stuff like that. And they were just down the road from me. So I thought, I'm going to go and see them. I need to see what they're like, how they do. And so I went there. It was in like an old working man's club, a big one, with bar along the side, fruit machines all round, all this kind of thing. It was just a fiver to get in. I have never been to a political rally like it.
Are we having a good time? Is this party on its way?
For a start, I've never been to a political rally where it was literally working class. If you go to a Labour Party meeting, you don't see real working class people. It's a ton of middle class people. You go to Labour Party conference, it's the middle class. It may be a working class start off with by the time you're going to a conference. This was proper working class people who are like getting their pie and chips and a pint, and then they're sitting down to listen to Nigel Farage speak. But what they did in this rally, and you can see this, any of your listeners who want to look it up, just go on YouTube, search Brexit Party Rally Newport, you will see it. What Richard Tice did is he literally had a mock prison built on stage where he was talking subtle, and he then talked about the deal, the Brexit deal that was on the table back then, and he described it as prison. And he had a PowerPoint slide that spelt out prison as he made out all his points with it. And every time a new letter came out, it had the sound of a prison door slamming shut. And you see this visually. And then he asks the audience, "Is that what you want?" "No." And then he smashed through the prison, really visual. "We want to be free from this. We want to be free from that. We want to be free from the other." He generated 23 seconds of applause. I timed all of the applause. I got the whole thing transcribed and then timed all of the bits of applause. That was the longest bit of applause during the whole rally for the metaphor, for a fundamental lie. It wasn't a prison, but the metaphor is powerful, and this is how you change behavior. That was only part of the metaphorical story, though. Your question, I'll get to it eventually, was actually about Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson's metaphor was even more elaborate. It wasn't just that getting out of the European Union represented us being free from prison, but he kept talking about the fruits that we would get after leaving. And so he always associated freedom from the European Union with food. So he was, if you like, the Brexit Party, Tyson Farage was selling the negative part of the narrative. Boris Johnson was selling the positive part of the narrative. This is the prize that we're heading towards. And so he always talks about Brexit as food. And so he only did 2 visits in the run up to the referendum. Both of them were to food places. One of them was to a fish processing facility up north. The other was to a biscuit factory, where he walks in there and he says, "Crikey, I've never seen so much dough in all my life. But the difference is you've got control over your dough. We've lost control over our dough. £350 million every week we're sending to Europe. We need to take back control."
Wow.
That was in the run up to the referendum. And then after the referendum, he started talking about how we've got to have our cake and eat it. And then that phrase took off. And everyone then started talking about the negotiations as cake. And so there were 1,273 articles in the British press that talked about Brexit and cake. So this connection in our minds is then really strongly being made. And then the 2019 general election, where Boris won this phenomenal landslide, fourth successive victory. I think it was the second biggest popular vote for any prime minister in the history of the country. So was it 13.9 million votes he got, or 14.1? I can't remember, but it was whopping anyway.
Amount,
A large amount. And all through that campaign, he'd been talking about this oven-ready deal. And every time he talks about the oven-ready deal, he was pictured with food as well. So the day before the general election, on the morning news, we saw him dressed as a milkman, literally delivering groceries to someone's house up in Leeds. And then in the evening news, he's putting a pie in an oven, saying this is the Get Brexit Done pie. It's the perfect metaphor for what it is that we're trying to achieve. Now, neuroscientists have shown that when we look at images of food, it generates a physiological reaction.
I was just thinking, I'm sitting here now and I've not had my lunch for a start, but I was sitting there going, "Oh, my mouth's going a bit. That's weird, isn't it?"
Yeah.
Your brain on climate.
So this is really relevant, right, to thinking about climate change and kind of how you get people to do stuff. Because this is all about, there's this myth, I think, in climate change land, hopefully getting a bit better now, that all you need to do is give people the facts. The problem is, Simon, people don't understand. They haven't seen this graph. And if that graph doesn't work, I've got this graph for them. And don't they understand about this number and that number and that we all need to do something? And what the implication of what you're saying is that is not how you get people to give a shit about stuff. It's something deeper and it's about emotions, right?
Yeah, facts don't count for very much in persuasion at all. I don't think. We're not checking them. Generally, for every fact that one person has in an argument, someone on the other side of the argument will have another fact, which also has some credibility to it. A lot of this stuff depends on perspective, on the way that you skew it. As we know in the climate change debate, people who look at climate trends over tens of thousands of years, will argue that this is actually nothing unusual, what we're going through. now. Whereas if you look at what's going on over the last 15 years, it's very, and they're both speaking from facts there, but it's, of course, it's the perspective that leads to distortion then in our perspective. So facts count for very, very little. It's actually because everyone's got them. But where you really make the difference is through metaphor. And climate change is really, really interesting because here we're talking about the literal destruction of our planet. It's genuine apocalypse, and it's quite funny that, well, it's not funny at all. But we can speak about an apocalypse, in sports, in football, or an economic apocalypse, and yet we speak about literal apocalypse in climate change in such a gentle and mild way. And so you'll speak about your carbon footprint. Your carbon footprint, it makes it sound almost benign, a little footprint, certainly nothing to worry about. You just sweep it up, whereas of course it's carbon vandalism, it's carbon harm, it's carbon damage,
Yeah. And we're recording this while the COP27 talk's going on. And I was thinking about this the other day. Everyone's talking about 1.5 degrees this, and I was thinking 1.5 degrees that. And obviously I understand what that represents. But it turn off. I find that a turn off, and I know what it means, right? Like just these sort of use of numbers to imply moral imperative doesn't really work, does it?
It doesn't. I mean, I'm sure someone has probably looked at it. If you asked people what 1.5 means and what it represents,
Sounds warm. Sounds nice.
well, or if people would have any clue at all what that means and what the consequences of it are. So. I mean, that's the slogan. That's a rhyming slogan, funnily enough. So it's like keep 1.5 alive, isn't it? That's the slogan that's been going around. But do people understand it? I think the trouble is a lot of the time on this stuff, when it comes to facts, there's a kind of conspiracy of silence and ignorance. So people are afraid to put their hands up and say, I really haven't got a clue what you're talking about. So we'll all just sit there and nod along. And I think that nodding along in silence has led to all sorts of problems in the past. I think there's that terrific book by the FT lady, is it Gillian Tett? Fool's Gold.
Yeah, about the crash, yeah.
About the financial crisis. Yeah, about the financial crisis, where she talks about having gone to a conference on derivatives, where she didn't have a clue. She was reporting on it, but she didn't have a clue, but she was kind of afraid to say she didn't have a clue. And I kind of related this. One of my early policy jobs was actually on corporate accounting before I got into speechwriting. And I remember going to meetings in Brussels on how to account for derivatives. I didn't have a clue what they were I don't think anyone had a clue what they were talking about. And no one wants to admit they're the ignorant one in the room.
Pluralistic ignorance. I did an episode about this. To my mind, one of the single greatest problems is that everyone thinks someone else thinks something that they don't think, and so no one says what they think, right? Like, for example, on climate change, most people think we should get on and do loads of stuff about climate change, but they think they're in a minority, so they don't say it. And that's just an example of it, right?
Yeah, a bit like bystander effect as well.
Bystander effect. And it also plays out in more sort of mundane ways, like just kind of, we talked about this in that episode and I won't rehash it, but like the imposter syndrome, when people feel like imposters, that's all pluralistic ignorance, where you just you think you are the only one who doesn't know what's going on and can't do your job and are out of your depth. And everyone thinks like that. In fact, I had a conversation at work today just like that about, someone feeling something like that. And I said, no, I feel like that too. And just sort of voicing this stuff, I guess is the point, is really important.
Yeah, it is. Well, just bringing it back to the point, which is kind of my area of expertise, I guess, about the language in particular, and thinking about the way that we speak about this, because there is a crossover here, actually, between the way we talk about the financial crisis and climate. So at the moment, you've got quite a concerted effort from the government to talk about a financial storm. So if you look at, I mean, RIP, but if you look at Liz Truss's brief period as Prime Minister, if you look at her Liz who? If you look at her first speech that she did on the steps of Downing Street as Prime Minister, she's taken great care in that speech to establish a storm metaphor.
We face. As strong as the storm may be, I know that the British people are stronger. Our country was built by people who get things done.
So she talks
We
about
have
the
huge
headwinds.
reserves
We are
of
facing
talent,
headwinds
of
at the
energy
beginning.
and
She talks about how we need to drive forward, how there's a path ahead. And she talks about how we've ridden out previous storms in the past and we can navigate our way through this storm. Now, she gave that speech. That was like 3 minutes or 4 minutes, very brief, appropriately brief, just hello, Britain, on becoming Prime Minister. And that instantly shaped the way that people were perceiving her premiership. So the following day's newspapers, I remember seeing this on the day, all of the broadsheets, literally all of the broadsheets had the word storm in the front page. Now, that's one metaphor for describing it. It's a very helpful metaphor for Liz Truss and for the Conservatives who have been in power for 12 years, had been in power for 12 years at that point, because it implies that the current financial turmoil we're going through is an act of nature, that it just arrived. It was sent down from the heavens and they're the responsible ones. And because they're in power at the moment, we need to keep them in power, because when you're navigating these storms,
they'll see the boat through the storm and everything will be all right again. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
You've got a coherent narrative there. However, if you wanted to depict it in a way that actually got people asking questions about culpability for where we are at the moment, then you would want to describe it not as a financial storm, but as a financial crash, because that would then lead you to ask who was at the wheel, who was driving, who was in charge, who brought this crashing down. And yet it's interesting because we don't think in this way, and campaigners, so not all campaigners, some brilliant campaigners do think about things in this way, but Keir Starmer didn't. So when he came back at PMQs after Truss had established the storm metaphor, he went with it. He played along and he was using the word storm as well. And he shouldn't have done. He should have been saying, this is not a storm. It's not an act of nature. You did it. Your government did it. And we need you to take responsibility for this. Stop blaming other people. This is, and changing the way that people thought about it. But this is the trouble, because metaphor kind of mediates between our logical brains and our unconscious brains. We don't always put our rational brains to work analyzing what's going on in our unconscious brain and another unconscious brain. We just go with it. We run with it. You're using the word storm, so I'm going to use the word storm. Whereas we need to think a bit more actively and strategically about metaphor if we want to really have an impact and change the way people think, feel, and act.
Right then, so that leads us to what is the best metaphor for climate change. What do you use? We've talked about wars and we've talked about races. You write in your book about needing metaphors that connect to, I love this sentence, I've written it down and shared it with everyone: sex, love, danger, disease, debt, darkness, and cake. Which you say these are the things that we actually really care about, and everything else we don't really care about. And these sort of core human needs is what, and fears. So what connects climate to those things metaphorically?
Yeah, I mean, well, the race, when I'm writing about climate change, because I'm a speechwriter, I write for different people who are writing from different perspectives. And so my first thing needs to be, what's your metaphor? So when I'm speaking to my clients, I listen to their language very, very carefully and will analyze it after I've spent time with them, trying to see what the metaphors are. And then when I can see one that seems to be their big one, then I'll really go into that and I'll try to create a much more vivid picture out of their words. So that's the first thing. So my idea, because I work for different people, I need to find what metaphor is best for them. So I can't really answer.
No, but that makes sense. That makes sense, doesn't it? Because you're not going to if someone's instinctively, their brain goes to particular ways of thinking about something, that's a good place to start, rather than trying to contort the entire way they think of something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And trying to help them focus in on a clear picture. So if you look at the speech that Antonio Guterres gave in COP27, it's garbage. I mean, it needed some work before going out. As far as its metaphors are concerned, there's no clarity in there. He talks about being on the back burner, being on a life support machine. He talks about a war. He talks about a race against time. He talks about how we're on the highway to hell. He talks about a roadmap. I think the clearest metaphor that he's got going on in there is actually the one about progress, which probably would be a good one, and so we do need to move beyond where we are at the moment. We're stuck. I think if I was his speechwriter, I'd have worked that into a vivid picture. I'd have say, well, why are we stuck? What are we stuck in? What's restraining us? What's holding us back? Are we imprisoned? You could take it like the Brexit way, I mean, the thing with metaphors is the possibilities are infinite. You're like an artist with a blank canvas, and you're like, well, what's the picture we want to draw here? What are the effects we want to create? You can go anywhere you want to. It's fun to view it as a creative endeavor. And literally with my clients, what I've done for probably about a decade now is actually literally sit there in meetings with them, and we'll draw pictures together. And it will say, is that what it looks like? And then when you can visualize it, then you can tell a coherent story. But it's clear that Guterres hasn't done that. He's got a whole load of conflicting images. As a result, he just sounds like he doesn't have a clear mind. He doesn't have a clear sight on the issues at hand. He's not sounding coherent. He's sounding quite disturbed. And I think if you want to properly inspire people and influence them, you need to have a clear picture in front of you of what it is that you can see. And if you can see it clearly, then you can paint a picture that other people will see clearly. And this is what the greats have done, like Churchill did with his Iron Curtain. There was never any doubt what he was talking about there, that it was a curtain, and it was an iron curtain. And on one side of that curtain, you had light, which was the West, and with, liberty and democracy and all of those things. And on the other side, you had darkness, which was communism and totalitarianism and all of that. And that was a clear picture, and he never deviated from that picture. There were no he wasn't like, we're on the back burner and laying down foundations while driving change and mixed metaphors. Churchill had that brain where he was able to, he had an imagination, which meant he could see things. And I think we need something like that on climate change. I think that for me, the war metaphor is great. I think it can, as the research shows, it's better than the race metaphor. But I fear with the war metaphor, it can lead to feelings of kind of submission.
One of the problems with the war metaphor that I've heard is I think some people are worried that it makes you think of like putting up borders. It kind of gets you into a frame of mind of others coming, others are coming to take our stuff. And I think there's some worries that the war metaphor, just as long as we're all right here, that's okay. If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess there's that problem with it.
I can see that. And I think just combative language, war metaphors in particular, can turn a lot of people off because we're so used to it. So much discourse takes place through war metaphors. I remember there was a study done of articles in Time magazine back in 2010, I think it was, that found that I think it was a third of articles in just one issue of Time magazine used war metaphors.
Right.
Everything's a war against drugs, war against litter. We're sick of it. So it may be that, something, I don't know. You can go wherever you want to go. Like they proved on Brexit, you can be breaking out of prison and moving forward and eating cake. Just take things you don't like, and that's where you are, and then have things that you do like that are irresistible, and that's where you want to get to, and create a story like that. It's almost like the way that a hypnotist might work. You want that kind of, narrative, that change narrative that is irresistible. So you feel a strong need to get out of the position you're in, and a strong desire to get to where you want to get to. And that's how you motivate people to change, let's get Paul McKenna or Darren Brown to, hypnotize the world and create a lovely, beautiful narrative about where it is we're trying to get to.
Look into my eyes, look into my eyes. The eyes. Not around the eyes, don't look around the eyes. Look into my eyes. You're under. 3, 2, 1.
I want to take this right back to the brain and how it works. I just want to like play back to you how profound I found the stuff you were saying about good speeches. There's a big chunk of your book. I'm not going to spoil it. People need to go and buy the book. It's called Connect. It's out now. It's good. And a big chunk of that book talking about like the dream structure for a speech. And what I loved about it was you were talking about all the different rhetorical things you can do and how you take people on a journey through a speech. But you were saying what you're also doing when you're doing that is you're taking people's brain chemistry on a journey. So you are actively releasing different chemicals which make you feel different things. I wondered if you just say a little bit about that, because it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, as a speechwriter, if you can get someone to tell you a good story, it's transformative. You can take someone who's a 1 out of 10 speaker and turn them into a 9 out of 10 speaker through nothing more than you just open up with a little story. We all love stories. We live by stories as human beings. We all know this, but it's that thing about being able to transport people somewhere else. And like on climate change, you know, just if I tell you that, like, I remember very well one of my first overseas ministerial trips that I did with Alan Johnson would have been in 1999 when I was a young guy, would have been, you know, mid-20s. And we went out to Bangladesh. And I remember going there to a reception that the ambassador, the British ambassador, the High Commissioner to Bangladesh was hosting. And he pointed out to all of this like shanty town that was in a valley, like opposite. And I looked in there and you could see like it was the poverty scene that we're all very familiar with from images on the news. And I remember seeing little children running and just looking out and thinking, wow, I don't think I've ever been so close to poverty. And just the sheer numbers were incredible. I mean, it was absolutely packed. And I was looking out the window, looking at this, and the ambassador said, you see that all of those houses, they're washed away 3 times a year.
Wow.
And they have to rebuild.
Wow.
And it was like, and this was way back in the 90s. Yeah. And you think about what's going on. And so we knew about climate change. Now, of course, Labour was doing things. We had the climate change levy back then and a few other things going on. But still, I mean, just climate change, obviously massively accelerating. And when you get stories like that, you've then created an image. So it's not just the stats anymore. You know, I've taken you somewhere. I've taken you into my world. You've seen the world through my eyes.
And I feel something. Like I feel what that must be like a bit. I mean, I can't obviously imagine, but I'm empathizing, right?
Yeah, right. And so this is the thing. There's a neuroscientist called Paul Zak. They call him the vampire neuroscientist because basically he'll tell people stories and then he'll quickly go and take blood from them in order that he can measure the different neurochemicals that have been released whilst they've been doing it. Literally, he'll wait for people to finish making love and then he'll leap in. It's like, right, I want to check your blood levels now.
Oh, yeah.
And what he's found is that when we're listening to stories, we release 2 interesting chemicals: oxytocin, which is like the moral molecule, basically. It's what connects us together. He calls it the moral molecule. And it connects us together. It inclines us to behave more morally when we hear people's stories. It's the essence what it means to be human, to empathize with other people, to share other people's perspectives. So you get an increase in oxytocin. And also you get an increase in cortisol. Cortisol, of course, is the stress drug, which makes us focus. So these 2 things in particular, this is the chemistry of a good story. So you need people to really connect with you at the beginning of the story. And the cortisol, the story needs to be really dramatic. So it gets people really focused on the issue. And what he's found, he asks people after telling them a story whether they'd be prepared to give some money to someone else in the room. And what he's found is that he's able to predict who will give money and how much money they'll give based on their oxytocin and cortisol levels. So this is like, again, it's like with the metaphor, it's breakthrough stuff for how you can really achieve change in people. You know, not only can you change the way that people perceive things, because through stories we see and experience other people's worlds, but you can change how they act, and ultimately you can get people to give you money. So that's, you know, what more do you need really? Instead of rattling the tins at people down the high street, just need to tell them a story first, and then put the tin out. But this is something that I've experienced over the years as well. Like, you know, I know that if I'm writing a speech for a fundraising event, if I've got a real knockout story at the beginning of it, you're going to raise a ton. If you've got someone who's just there, oh, I'm just going to talk through the science, you're like, oh God, you
Right.
get like a fiver at the end of it or something like that. Whereas a real big story, we know this in discourse on all the big events, whether you're thinking about immigration, economics, coronavirus lockdowns, or climate change. It's the stories. You just need one person's story, and the whole debate can change.
Simon, thank you so much for coming on Your Brain on Climate. Fascinating chat. How can people find out more about you? What's your book called? How can people keep in touch? That sort of thing.
Brilliant. Well, it's Simon Lancaster. The book is Connect, How to Inspire, Influence, Energize Anyone, Anywhere, Anytime. You can get it on Amazon, and you can get it at ethical retailers as well. And all of
if
your
they still
local,
exist. Yeah.
If they still exist.
Yes.
And you can catch me on Twitter at Bespoke Speeches, LinkedIn, TikTok, and all of that. And do get in touch if you're interested in discussing further.
And of course, you can bump into him in the South Stand of Brentford on any given Saturday.
Samosa in hand.
Right, wonderful stuff. Simon's book is, I would say, required reading for anyone interested in this stuff, interested in language, communication, speeches, talking, rhetoric, any of it. It'll open your eyes to how your brain works, why your brains like stories, why a good speech grabs you by the gullet. It'll also give you all sorts of ideas and tips for how to use language more effectively, and the power of metaphor, not just in bringing others with you, but in constraining or unconstraining your own thinking about stuff. So check it out. Thank you so much, Simon, for coming on here. And if you want to support me to have guests like Simon, who I did pay for his time like everyone else, you can do so at Patreon, www.patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. Or if you can't do that, even if you can do that, please, 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 as I'm trying to build an audience, go to Apple Podcasts, wherever else you can leave a review, leave a nice gushy 5-star review and write some words with your hands. That'd be superb. I'd love to hear from you. I'm on the socials on Twitter at BrainClimate, or you can drop me an email at hello@yourbrainonclimate.com. I shall be back next month. Until then, please look after yourself, and please tell stories that grab people by the short and curlies and do not let them go. Yes? Yes.